Hey everybody, welcome back to Curry's Home History Studio. Today I have for you my Kings and Queens of England necktie, and I have a nice tartan mug of tea. So hopefully you got some tea, you're enjoying yourself, and you're watching this from a comfortable location. Let's talk about Chapter 17, Section 2. This is about the Northern Renaissance that happens after the Italian Renaissance. By the late 1400s, Italian ideas had spread north, and they started to change life in England, France, Germany, and the next blank is Flanders, kind of like the neighbor on The Simpsons, Ned Flanders. Flanders is really like Belgium and the Netherlands. There, merchants got really rich from the wool trade in Flanders. They became patrons of the arts. There were kings, especially the King of France, like Francis, the guy who gets Leonardo da Vinci to move to France. They were important patrons. The Northern Renaissance grew differently than the Italian Renaissance because instead of focusing on non-religious, or the vocab word we would use is secular, instead of focusing on secular ideas like the Italians did, Northern Renaissance thinkers and writers got more religious. They decided to ignore the Catholic Church, but not ignore the church to do secular things. Instead, they decided to ignore the Catholic Church in order to find out more about who Jesus really was. Go back to the original Greek and Hebrew writings that were important before the Latin Bible was published. They wanted to go back to the kind of what would Jesus do lifestyle instead of what would these corrupt money-grubbing popes do, right? Around 1500, it got really hard for artists to stay in Italy because there were constant wars. The city-states were attacking each other. It got nasty. There were military invasions of Italy because the city-states were so wrapped up in each other. Foreigners decided to come in and steal some of the wealth. Artists, a lot of Italian artists decided to leave. It was time to leave Italy, like Leonardo did, and he went to France. So people were coming to Italy to study art originally, but then the artists of Italy decided in large numbers to leave and bring their styles to Northern Europe. Germany had some really great artists of this time, like Albrecht Dürer. Albrecht Dürer was called the Leonardo da Vinci of the North. He was good at a whole bunch of stuff. He made etchings, he made prints, he made paintings. He was multi-talented, really, really excellent at everything he did. There are also other artists like Hans Holbein. Holbein painted portraits, close-up portraits, like this distance. And he did it for a lot of royal families, including Henry VIII of England. Hans Holbein became his royal court portrait painter. Painters from Flanders are probably the most famous of all the painters of the Northern Renaissance, including Jan van Eyck. Jan and his brother, the Van Eyck brothers, were famous for tiny, tiny miniatures, making giant paintings that have incredible detail in them, right down to the tiniest little speck, the right thing at the right place. Everyday life was the subject of some artists like Peter Bruegel, B-R-E-U-G-E-L, Peter Bruegel. Also, Hieronymus Bosch. If you ever want to know what it would be like to be tripping on the weirdest drugs on the planet and see religious imagery, look up Hieronymus Bosch. He's got all these fantastic hellscapes. Just the most bizarre things, like nuns with pigs' faces and demons eating people and crapping them out again. So, yeah, check out Hieronymus Bosch. Okay. Writers of this time period. Two of the greatest writers of this time wanted to make religion and society better. Desiderius Erasmus was one of those writers, and the other was Sir Thomas More. In his book, The Praise of Folly, basically meaning all we ever do is compliment people who are doing stupid things. We're just praising people who are making mistakes. That's what the book title means. In this book, Erasmus thinks that we should be less interested in being fashionable and following the hollow rules of modern society, and instead going back to caring about people and following the real teachings of Jesus and not the Catholic Church teachings of the medieval period, which were corrupt and flawed. Interesting little side story that's in Praise of Folly. A pope dies, and he goes to the gates of heaven to be let in. And St. Peter, who guards the gates, says, "Okay, who are you?" "I'm Pope Urban. Let me in." "Yeah, I don't have you on my list." "What? I'm the Pope. Let me in." "Yeah, well, you kind of have to prove that you did good things on earth. So what did you do?" "Oh, that's easy. As leader of the church, I took millions and millions of dollars in tax money from the poor." "Okay, tell me what you did that was good." "Okay, well, in the name of God, I had hundreds of thousands of people killed in religious wars." "Okay, you're really not helping me here. I don't think we're going to be able to let you in. You sound horrible." So that's kind of the way that he pokes fun at the church for all the awful things that they're doing, when at that time what they should have been doing was being more like Jesus. The other great thinker that I mentioned was Sir Thomas More. Sir Thomas More was a government advisor for Henry VII and then Henry VIII. He was a personal friend of Henry VIII. He wrote a book called Utopia. And in his book Utopia, people don't care about the things that are bad. They don't care about the things in life that we obsess about that are awful. Instead, the people are good, they're kind, they're loving and caring. The people of Utopia are living in a perfect world. And even in Utopia, there's no such thing as private property. So they're basically communist. But anyway, the problem with Utopia, though, is Thomas More didn't really get to live in one. He disagreed with the policies of King Henry VIII. He refused to switch religions when Henry VIII said he needed to become a Protestant instead of stay Catholic. And he was beheaded by Henry VIII. So if only he'd been able to live in the kind of utopia that he wrote about, Thomas More would have had a longer, happier life. Christine de Pizan is a great French Northern Renaissance writer of this time, French and Italian. She wrote a book called The City of Ladies. And in this book, she basically says women should be treated better. Women should kind of be equals to men. It's one of the first major feminist pieces of work. The City of Ladies. Wisdom, far, far before its time. In England, we call this period the Elizabethan Age. And Queen Elizabeth is somewhere here on this tie, I'm sure. Take me a minute to find her. Probably a little further down. Elizabeth I. Queen Elizabeth I was the child of Henry VIII. We'll get to that story some other time. But famous Englishmen at this time include William Shakespeare, the great playwright William Shakespeare, the author of the most famous plays in history. His plays frequently cover historical subjects from the classical world. He delves deep into the human psyche and human nature for his characters. He wrote dramas and comedies like Hamlet and Macbeth, Antony and Cleopatra, Julius Caesar, The Taming of the Shrew, and probably most famously, Romeo and Juliet. Got a heart there for Romeo and Juliet. Incidentally, I was in a high school production of Romeo and Juliet. It wasn't school associated, though. It was a private company, and we did it out at Fort Williams, and it was amazing. Really, really cool. The Chinese had already invented block printing long before the Europeans did, but they weren't able to really take advantage of block printing because of their language, because they have like 10,000 different characters that you'd need to have blocks for. Instead, in our language, we have 26 characters plus some punctuation that you need to have blocks for. So it's a lot easier to use a printing press in our languages than it is Chinese. Around the year 1440, a European designed the first European printing press. His name was Johann Gutenberg, and he made the Gutenberg Bibles. That was a major, major thing. There are some Gutenberg Bibles that are still around today, and they're the most expensive books on earth, pretty much. So, people now had a reason to learn to read and write, because books could be printed and distributed way faster than in the medieval period, where the monks had to do it on the dried skin of sheep using only handwriting and illustrate them all by hand as well. Now, with a printing press, we can have a lot more books, and a lot more people are going to learn to read and write. And in future sections, like the next section, they're going to have major reasons to learn to read and write as well. So, there's all your blanks. There's your lesson. Hope you enjoyed it. It was a good one. Thanks. Take care. Bye-bye.